Okay, I think that we are live and ready to go. Let people join the live here on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, wherever. Glad to have everybody aboard tonight. My name is Brian Schott, and I am the publisher and managing editor of Utah Political Watch. It is Tuesday, May 5th, 2026. Glad to have you aboard, and we've got a lot to chat about tonight on the program. I want to remind you that if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. We're live tonight on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitch. Leave your questions, comments. I will get to them as quickly as possible. I want to apologize. I was not on for a live last week. We skipped last week. My wife had surgery, so I had to play nursemaid and attend to her over the last week in the evening. So that's why I was not on for the live. So I apologize for that. But we are back today, and it's great to have you on board. What are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about the big data center that got approved up in Box Elder County. I want to get your thoughts on that. I also want to talk about what happened at the Republican and Democratic state conventions, which sets up the primaries, and where things go from there. And we have a few other things on the docket tonight as well. We have the nominees for the two new Supreme Court slots that the Utah Republicans in the legislature created. They expanded the court. Let's just say what it is. They packed the court after getting a couple of rulings that they didn't like. There's a new law going into effect tomorrow that, again, targets your privacy. This is right after a law has already gone into effect that's going to make everybody's voter information public. And I've got some thoughts on that, and we can talk about that as well. All sorts of stuff. Also, redistricting is going to be happening more around the country and even more in 2028. And I'm telling you right now, do not be surprised if Utah redraws their maps in 2028, because the maps we have right now for 2026, I'm pretty darn sure will not be the maps we have in place, the congressional maps for 2028. So we can talk about all of that tonight. I'm glad that you're on board. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the chat. We'll get to them as quickly as possible this evening. A few people are already starting to chime in on TikTok, and we'll get to that. But I do want to point out there's something that happened historically 41 years ago today, and I think it's worth talking about. And it was when President Ronald Reagan visited Bitburg, Germany, and he went and laid a wreath. He had a wreath laying ceremony at a cemetery where a number of Waffen SS soldiers were buried. It was a German war cemetery that had SS soldiers in it. And a lot of people were kind of outraged about it. And I think it's worth talking about. That was 41 years ago today, and I think we should bring this up because the Ramones wrote a song about it, and it's called Bonzo Goes to Bitburg. Let me put on my headphones so I can make sure you're hearing this right. I'll let everybody play there. Don't understand what they mean by Bonzo Goes to Bitburg. That's a reference to Ronald Reagan and his series of movies, or the movie that he did when he was an actor, with a monkey called Bonzo, Bedtime for Bonzo. And so they decided to write this song, Bonzo Goes to Bitburg. The song was actually playing in my car today. I had to take my wife to a doctor's appointment, and this song came up on my Apple Music. And we were chatting about it, and I made the observation that the Ramones, they are not subtle when it comes to their lyrics. You might remember their other song, a whole bunch of other songs. There's another particularly political song that seems relevant right now. The KKK Took My Baby Away. let's all remember the time that the American president went to Germany and laid a wreath in a cemetery where a bunch of SS soldiers were. Okay, that's enough of that. All right, let's get to your questions, your comments. Let's talk about what's going on with a big data center up in Box Elder County. 40,000 acres is the size of this. Some of it is built on military land, and that's why a group, MIDA, an organization, MIDA, M-I-D-A, and MIDA stands for Military Installation Development Authority. It's a government entity made up of appointed members. And what they do is they help finance development projects that benefit the military, that support the military. And they are the ones who gave the initial approval for this 40,000 hyperscale data center project in Box Elder County. Now, 40,000 acres, I'm pretty sure that's not going to be the size of the building. I think that's the size of the plot of land. Some of it falls on military land. That's why MIDA can get involved. They are giving infrastructure loans, help build the infrastructure for this. And they also are giving a tax break because they basically act like a local government when they do this sort of thing. They create project areas that have, as I said, some sort of military land, Hill Air Force Base, sometimes National Guard. And then they oversee these development projects and give financial incentives and help finance them through bonding to help them grow, help them come into being, and then those bonds are paid back through tax revenue. Some of the projects they have financed: Falcon Hill. That's an aerospace research park up at Hill Air Force Base. There's a hotel up there. There's a military recreation facility around Jordanelle Reservoir. That includes the Hyatt up at Deer Valley and the East Village expansion at Deer Valley Resort. There's a data center already in place down at Camp Williams. In Bluffdale, that's about 200. It's just about under 250 acres, so it's not as big as the hyperscale data center that's they've approved up at Box Elder County. They also have done some big hotels up at, I believe it's Snowbird is one of them, and so they are responsible for helping to finance these millions of dollars worth of projects. The chairman of MIDA is Senate President Stuart Adams. So, I mean, he's got his fingers in this. And also Jerry Stevenson. But as I said, this entire board of MIDA is appointed. They're not elected. But they do get to act like a local government in these areas because they are financing these projects. So they're in charge of what's happening with this big data center. And so that answers the question. We had a question on TikTok here that says, who owns the land where the data center wants to go? Well, the local landowners are pretty much being pressured to, I believe, sell the land. But it's going to be, it's a project area, and MIDA is in charge of approving it, and then the Box Elder County Commission, they gave their stamp of approval yesterday. Now it's not done because the state engineer has to step in and look at the plans and everything. And I saw some reports today that over 2,500 objections have already been filed with the state engineer. But you know, this project, when you have Governor Spencer Cox at his press conference last week saying Utah has an obligation to do this sort of thing, you kind of get the idea that the state engineer, I'm not saying that they are being told what to do, but I think you can kind of see the conclusion that they're going to come to. Scott Rock says MIDA acts like a government, but aren't elected or accountable. Exactly. Although Stuart Adams is accountable because he's up for election this year and he's facing a primary challenge, pretty tough primary challenge too. He's got 2 primary challengers. He's never had to run in a primary, but that's really the only way that you can hold them accountable. And I don't know how much this is going to affect his race. I suspect that it's going to play a bit of a role in the race, but I'm not sure exactly what it's going to. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to impact it. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. I don't watch that show. I think it's stupid. I do like Mark Cuban, but the idea is Shark Tank, stupid show, and he's off-putting to me, so I don't watch that show. But I think he calls himself Mr. Wonderful. He did push back against the criticism today. He said all of the people, all the protesters, and if you saw the videos yesterday, there were quite a few people, probably several thousand who showed up to protest this data center. He said that they were bussed in from out of state, which is sort of the go-to criticism when there's public outcry against something. Protesters are bussed in from out of state. That I don't know why they make that claim, because it's pretty easy to fact check, pretty easy to go to busing companies and say, hey, did you have a contract to bus some people in? But they're counting on you not thinking about it for 5 seconds, because I don't think that people saw a lot of buses. My wife saw the video and she said those are Box Elder County farmers. Those were people who were not bussed in from out of state. Nathan Detroit on Twitch says, with noted Canadian Kevin O'Leary involved, what could go wrong? I know you're being facetious, but a lot could go wrong, because when you look at this proposed data center, it's going to consume, I think, twice as much power as the state already consumes. So we're going to have to build more power capacity for that. It's going to use a ton of water. The NSA data center, that's, I believe, is down in Camp Williams, that one uses so much water. The legislature did pass a bill that said these data centers have to disclose how much water they are using, which is a good thing, but it's going to use a bunch of water. It's a curious decision environmentally when there's so much rhetoric around saving the Great Salt Lake, and then you're going to put in this facility that's going to create a heat island. They generate so much heat. They're going to use a lot of water, especially when the Great Salt Lake is in crisis. It's very disconnected from a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing. BG Lee 34 on Instagram says, I was there. It was Northern Utah folks all around. Yeah, that's exactly what everyone I've talked to said happened as well. But, when you're looking for someone to blame, you blame the shadowy out-of-state groups that are bussing people in. Really, the last time that people were bussed in someplace to protest was January 6th, and that was Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, who bussed in a bunch of people, and they ended up attacking the U.S. Capitol and trying to kill members of Congress. So that's really the only time that that's happened, when you've had protesters bust in. Shells Bells on TikTok says the concerns about the water is valid and should be a basis for a challenge by the locals. The commissioners, I think 2 of the 3 commissioners who approved this are up for re-election this year, but they only have Republican challengers. So this Republican primary that's coming up, that's it. That's the only way to hold them accountable. There are no Democrats running in those races. So that's really the only accountability that's going to happen. But so that's what's happening with the data center. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your comments on this. Like I said, it's not over with, but there's got to be approvals, and the state engineers got to get involved with it. And as I said, there have been reports today that over 2,500 objections have already been filed with that. But you wonder, with all of the money that's at stake, because they're claiming it's going to bring in thousands of jobs. Usually what happens when you have a data center is those jobs are construction jobs. And then when the construction's over, those jobs go away because you don't need hundreds of people to staff a data center. The state data center staffing needs are pretty minimal. So I don't know what kind of economic impact this is going to have, but this is one of the reasons why legislators, specifically Stuart Adams, love to talk about how Utah is the number one state when it comes to business. Very welcoming when it comes to business. Again, I don't know how much revenue this is going to generate because they're getting a tax break through MITA, getting to build this thing, and all of that is based on future performance. So, anyway, want to hear your thoughts. Want to hear your comments. We got a lot of other stuff to talk about this evening. Let's see. Nathan Detroit says, let's fill the federal lands with alternating alfalfa farms and data centers. Well, there you go. I mean, that would be that would pretty much do it. If you're looking for a way to get rid of the Great Salt Lake in a very short amount of time, that would do it. Alfalfa farms, which is one of the most water-intensive crops out there. And I keep bringing this up, but I remember one time in his governor's press conference, I asked Governor Cox about how agriculture is the biggest user of water in the state, or one of the biggest users, and specifically alfalfa. And he got very defensive. Did not like that question because he is an alfalfa farmer. And he knows a lot of people around him who that is their livelihood. And, if you're going to do that, the government would have to do something financially to help soften the blow if you were going to cut off the water for alfalfa. And I don't know if this government would do that. I don't know if the Utah government would do that. Nathan Detroit also asks, any insight whether this drought declaration will have more teeth? I don't know. I just know it's going to be a really bad summer. At least it's shaping up to be. I think this is going to be a life-altering summer. We did not get the snow we needed over the winter. And our snowpack, they call it the no-pack because water is going to be scarce. And I think it's really going to impact a lot of it's going to impact a lot of aspects of life here in Utah over the next summer, over the next couple of years. And I don't know if praying is going to be the way to get out of this. I don't know if praying for moisture is going to be the way to get out of this, which is Governor Cox's go-to move on that. So we shall see. And Detroit says that Cox is mulling issuing a drought declaration. My recollection from the last drought declaration was that it was pretty watered down, basically just try to use less water with no actual restrictions. I think we're going to hit emergency restrictions. But, if the governor wants to issue that, I think this is something that came out of the pandemic. It can only be for 30 days, and then the legislature has to weigh in. And I think he also needs to get the approval of the House Speaker or the Senate President for an emergency declaration, if there's going to be an emergency declaration. That's something that came out of the pandemic, where the governor just does not have the authority to declare an emergency. I think he's limited to 30 days now. And then, and if he wants to do it, he also has to have one of those two sign off for him, which I don't understand why the Senate President or the House Speaker are involved in that, because when you look at they do not represent the state as a whole. The governor represents the state as a whole. And so I don't know why they need to be involved in that. When they first passed this law, as we came out of the COVID pandemic, I remember asking then House Speaker Brad Wilson why he was involved in this chain of command. Because if you look at the number of people that he represents, it was probably around 20,000, while the governor represents 3.5 million people who live here in the state. And he got really mad about that. But that is just this creeping power grab by the legislature where they are now involved in all these decisions. So if there's going to be an emergency declaration, the legislature will have to get involved after 30 days. So I'm sure that there are some negotiations going on behind the scenes with Governor Cox. But I don't know what kind of teeth it's going to have. I think they might be forced. The teeth might be. Or the enforcement, or the stick and carrot. I don't think there's going to be a lot of carrot, and there's going to be a lot of stick, simply because we're not going to have the water. Kay Lamelin on TikTok says, if he asks us to pray for rain again, I'm going to riot. Oh, he's going to do that. You remember when he did it the first time? And John Oliver on HBO just mocked him ruthlessly, like really made fun of him over that. And you can tell that mocking really hurt Governor Cox's feelings, because when we finally did get the rain and we had the above average winter following that, he took the biggest victory lap you've ever seen, because he stuck it to that mean comedian. Speaking of hurt feelings, I really wonder just how hurt the feelings are of Governor Cox, because the King's English bookstore canceled their promotion of his forthcoming book. They said if you pre-ordered the book, you got a signed copy of his forthcoming book. And a lot of people got really mad about that. They didn't think that they should be promoting that, and they canceled the promotion. And I'm sure that also stung Governor Cox. But I think when you're the king, I think King's English didn't read the room. I don't think that they read the room in terms of their clientele. Their clientele are not people who are. They may have been Spencer Cox supporters once, but they ain't no more. They ain't no more. So. Nathan Detroit says, maybe we can get the WHO to send in shock troops to defend the drought. That could force the state government to act. I think that Representative Christian Chevrier, Representative Lisa Shepard, probably Representative Stephanie Grecius, they would have a heart attack if the WHO sent in shock troops. Phil Lyman would also have a big heart attack. If you hear something coming in, my dog Murphy is coming in to visit. She's, as I said, she's been having some seizures, and it's affected her a little bit, and she gets a little panicky at this time of night. So she's just come in for a little reassurance. So she's right here next to me. So if you hear some panting, that's just her. The seizures have caused some issues, but she's still here. We love her very much, and so it's okay if she just wants to be in here for a little bit of comfort. So apologize for that if it affects the stream at all. But you got to take care of our little furry friends. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that having the King's English is basically tell or cancel their promotion with Governor Cox. That probably does not sit well with him. Probably does not sit well with him at all. So anyway, Emma Jolo on YouTube says, can we stop trying to get grass to grow here? It clearly doesn't thrive without a lot of water. And for what? To look nice, there are a lot of ways to make a yard look nice. Yeah. You're going to get no argument from me here. Grass it's ornamental. It really doesn't serve much of a purpose. It kind of looks nice when it's up, when it's kept up, but it takes a lot of water. It really does. And people are going to have to cut back. And if there's one thing that Americans have a really hard time with, it's sacrifice. That's why I think these high gas prices, if we get into a prolonged period of high gas prices, rising inflation, it's going to have an impact. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see President Trump's so freaked out right now and pushing for legislatures around the country, Republican legislatures, after the Supreme Court basically gutted the what's left of the Voting Rights Act, pushing them to redistrict all of a sudden. Florida's getting in on the act, Alabama, Louisiana, probably Mississippi, because they know that if they have to, the voters are mad right now. Voters are angry, and they don't want to have to face that at the polls. So, but I want to know from you, do you think that this data center, how much is this going to impact the elections? Because really the only elected official, aside from the Box Elder County Commissioners who voted to approve this, and I believe 2 of them are up for election this year. Aside from that, the only other person who's in that chain of command, who's directly responsible for this, who could suffer some consequences, is President Stuart Adams. He's in a 3-way primary coming up on June 23rd. Do you think that this might play a role in his reelection bid? I'm curious what your thoughts are. Leave them in the chat and we can talk about that. And pretty much anything else that you want to talk about as well. Allie the Alley Cat on TikTok says, "I'm so tired, dude." Yeah. I think a lot of people are tired. Yeah. And I think people are angry. And if you look at what's happening nationally, again, I don't know what's going to happen in November, and I try not to be a prognosticator, but right now the wind is certainly blowing. The Democrats certainly have the wind at their back in terms of people who want change. And change is a really big motivator in politics. I don't know how that's going to impact the election. I don't know what role that's going to play. I don't know how much of a role it's going to play here in Utah, whether it's going to do anything with the legislature. I'm trying to run some models right now, because if you don't know, I have developed a race rating system for all 75 House districts and the 15 Senate districts that are up for election this year, trying to project them. I've come up with a couple of metrics, and you'll find that on the website, utahpolitics.news. That's for annual subscribers. And I just published some updates to that, to the Senate and to the House ratings. And right now I'm trying to run some simulations as to what could possibly happen if there is, like a 5-point Democratic wave and it hits Utah, a 10-point Democratic wave that hits Utah. What sort of things would we see? What I'm guessing right now is, and all the indications right now is, it wouldn't lead to a Democratic majority, but it could threaten the Republican supermajority in maybe one of the houses, maybe in the House. And again, that's going to be a really hard thing to do because Republicans have 50 seats for a supermajority, and they currently have 61. So Democrats would need to flip 11 seats in order to get rid of the supermajority. But if Republicans lose the supermajority, that really changes the politics of this state. The way that the Republicans would govern would change drastically, because they would not be able to, they would still be able to ram things through on a line item vote, but they wouldn't have the 2/3 built in that would prevent them from a governor's veto. Not that Spencer Cox is going to veto anything, but it would also open them up for more referendum drives like we saw with the union bill. Because if that's why the supermajority is so crucial to what the Republican legislature has been doing over the last few years. If they can get the 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate, then you cannot try to overturn a bill with a referendum. So I'm running those simulations, and I should have a story on that coming up in the next week or so on Utah Politics Not News. Go over to the website. There's a lot of good stuff there. A lot of my all my reporting podcasts. You can find the race ratings. I've got candidate trackers. You can see who's running in every single race. I really try to keep on top of all that stuff. And you can throw some money in the tip jar if you appreciate what I do, because I'm an independent journalist. This is all reader funded. I don't have any billionaires. I don't have any corporations backing me. It's people who consume my content. And so far it's working, and I'm so appreciative of that. But if you want to support independent journalism, like what I do here in Utah, just go over to utahpolitics.news, and you can become a subscriber. It's like $5 a month, $55 a year, and you can get a hold of those race ratings. Or if you don't want to do a subscription, you can put some money in the tip jar. So we talked about the data center, and again, I am curious about your thoughts. Do you think that's going to impact the election coming up? Really, the only election it might play a role in is Senate President Stuart Adams' primary election. He's got two challengers there. Looking at some of the comments, let's see. Journey Girl 67 on YouTube says, I think between the data center, Prop 4, and going after the judiciary, the leaders of the state have pissed a lot of people off. That's, again, I'm not in the prediction mood. I'm not in the prediction business, but it feels like maybe they're not reading the room, to reuse an analogy that I did earlier. It feels like the Republican legislature is not reading the room. They are really pushing to, they really want to make the Supreme Court and the judiciary, the Utah Supreme Court and the Utah judiciary, the issue in this election. They are pushing really hard. At the state convention, a couple of Saturday or state convention last month, the end of last month, there were so many mentions of voting to oust the two female members of the Utah Supreme Court who are up for retention elections, vote no against them because they have ruled against the legislature several times, and they're very mad about these congressional maps, which cost them a seat. But if you look at the whole record, it's their own fault that they did that to themselves. They are the ones who missed deadlines to appeal, and they locked themselves into these maps for 2026. I think that probably next year they're going to redraw the maps again for 2028, but they are the ones who did this to themselves. They only have themselves to blame, but they really want to make these judges the issue in this election when there are so many other things. There's inflation, there's gas prices, and they really can't do a lot about inflation and gas prices, but national conditions will most definitely play a role here in Utah, and I don't know how much people are going to be thinking about the judiciary. They're also going to be, at least, we haven't seen it yet, but I expect them to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that says that they can override or repeal any citizen initiative that is passed at the polls, any ballot initiative. It basically overrides what the Supreme Court ruled in 2024, that they overstepped their bounds, and basically lets the legislature have final say on any ballot initiative. The Supreme Court ruled that the legislature cannot repeal a citizen initiative just part and parcel. They have to have a compelling reason. It needs to be targeted what they did, which is not what they did when they repealed Prop 4. So they want to have that ballot, and they want to have that, at least they've been talking about putting that constitutional amendment on the ballot. There's already another constitutional amendment on the ballot that says any ballot initiative that has a tax increase must pass with 60% of the vote, not 50% of the vote. And the way that it's worded, it pretty much anything that costs money, any initiative that costs money could be construed as needing a tax increase, because the sponsors have to explain how they're going to pay for it. And that's a constitutional amendment they're putting on the ballot as well. They were really counting on having the repeal of Prop 4 on the ballot, but last week it officially was declared insufficient. The number of signatures dropped, but they were really want to make this judiciary and the decisions surrounding Proposition 4 and the constitutional maps, they want that to be the issue for this election. And I don't know if the populace is whipped up enough to vote for those things. When they're mad, it doesn't matter if you've got an angry electorate. Usually the people who get punished are the incumbents, no matter what the party is. I don't know how much they're going to get punished, but I don't know what kind of appetite there is going to be among the public to pass these constitutional amendments. Gabriel on YouTube says, how does that three-way primary work out? Do the other two candidates split the anti-Adams vote and Adams wins with a plurality? I don't know. I mean, that one's going to be really hard that one is really hard to handicap just in terms of the Republican primary, because Adams has never faced a primary before. This is the first time he's ever been sent to a primary. He's facing Stephanie Hollis and Braden Hess. Adams did win the delegate vote at convention, but he got just under 55% in the third round. That should set off some alarm bells for Adams, because he's never failed to get at least 60% at convention every time he's been up for re-election, because he's always won the nomination at convention. He's never been forced into a primary. He's forced into the primary for the first time ever. I don't know how to handicap that. I suspect that part of what you're saying is right, that Hollis and Hess are going to split part of that anti-Adams vote, and you have to wonder. Not only is the data center something that people might be angry at Stuart Adams about, but there was a story from last year about him changing the law that ended up benefiting his granddaughter, who was accused of sexually assaulting a minor. The law didn't directly impact her case, but it was one of the reasons this law change was one of the reasons why she got a plea deal. And the prosecutors, I mean, that fact is not in dispute. The fact that the legislature changed this law about how they treat 18-year-olds, some 18-year-olds who are accused of rape, when they changed that law, the prosecutor in the case, the defense, even the judge, all pointed to this new law as part of the reason why she was allowed to plead to a lesser charge and get a plea deal. Reporting at the time said that the victim's mother was really surprised by that. And that story is still hanging around with Adams. And so you don't know how much that's going to impact it as well. But I think that is clearly one of the races that I'm going to have my eye on as we head to the June primary. Kathy on YouTube says, I looked at the ratings, but I was wondering how you think about District 10 right now. Well, I did update my ratings today, and I did move District 10. Let me pull up my ratings here so we can all be talking about it. Again, these ratings are for subscribers only. But if you look at the House ratings, I did move House District 10 today. I moved that from a toss-up to lean Democratic. And part of the reason why is because former Representative Rosemary Lesser, she's got more money right now than her Republican opponent. And you couple that with the fact that she's got name ID because she's a former incumbent trying to get the seat back. She's got the advantage right now. I do expect Republicans to give money to fund her opponent. In 2024, when she lost to Jill Kofod by a very slim margin, it was one of the most expensive House races in Utah history. A ton of money was spent by both of those candidates. Lesser will have whatever resources she needs. I expect Republicans to pour some money into that race as well. I think it's part of the reason why Rosemary Lesser jumped to run for Senate District 5, which is the seat being vacated by Ann Milner. She's not running for re-election there. I don't think she wanted any part of Lesser in a rematch. I don't think she wanted that kind of that stressful, very expensive race. So I did move House District 10 from toss-up to lean Democratic, because I do think that Lesser has the advantage as we sit right now. Looking through some of the other candidates as we have here. Kamelin on TikTok says, I am in Stuart Adams' district. I plan on being very loud about the data center. I think it's going to be a factor. How much of a factor? I don't know, but I do think it's going to be a factor in this election, because he's the guy that you can directly point to. He's the chairman of MITA, and they're the ones who approve this Project Stratos, which is this hyperscale data center. Some people are up in arms about this, and I disagree with Kevin O'Leary. These were not people who were bussed in from out of state. How would you even do that? I mean, you need someone who, I mean, I guess they can say George Soros paid for it. I've been accused of being paid by George Soros. I've never seen a check. Maybe they got lost in the mail. But you know, I don't buy that at all. But yeah, Adams has some issues this year, and I expect it to play a role in the upcoming election. But again, I don't know how much of a role that's going to be. Yeah, Kofort. I thought I said Kofort, Kathy. Let's see. Looking through some of the other comments. Kathy also wanted me to talk about the Utah Supreme Court. They did release the 12 nominees for the two brand new Supreme Court seats that were created by the legislature. Court packing, that's what it is. It's court packing. It's not bringing Utah in line with other states. It's court packing because they did not like the rulings that they got in the abortion trigger law. They didn't like the ruling they got in the redistricting case. So they created two brand new seats on the Supreme Court, expanded it, and the nominees were announced last week. All of them are men. Although I don't. There's been a lot of hand wringing that there was not a single female nominated, and I get that point. And there was like this thing flowing around that the odds of not getting a single female nominee were like 4,000 to 1 or something. But Senator Todd Weiler pointed out on social media that the commission that came up with these nominees, there are women on the commission, and only 4 women statewide even applied for these openings. So there wasn't a big pool of women in the first place. Not defending the decision, but I think that that's a factor that people need to take into account when talking about this. Anyway, the public comment period is open right now, and it is open until May 10th. So next week is the last week to submit public comment on these nominees for the Utah Supreme Court. That's what happens when you go 42 minutes without taking a drink. Nathan Detroit says, I know sign statistics are imprecise, but I'm seeing Lisenby signs on homes in Davis County that never have political signs up. Any recent polling on the CD2 primary, I imagine Moore is going to cruise to victory over his right-wing challengers as he does every cycle. I'm not aware of any polling. I was actually talking with Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights, and I'm going to give them a plug again because they are probably the most accurate pollster in Utah. The last cycle in 2024, they pretty much nailed every race, including the governor's race. They predicted that Phil Lyman would get about 15% of the write-in vote, and he got around 13%. So they were right on. One of the most accurate pollsters here in Utah. They get it right. They get the right sample. They do the right weighting. And I asked him if he was going to be doing any polling in CD1, CD2, and he basically said it would be so hard right now and so expensive to get the right sample size, the right number of people from each of the parties that it's cost prohibitive. So when you see a poll, when you see a poll about this. And we have had one poll in the Congressional District 1 Democratic primary. Take it with a grain of salt because we don't know much about their sample, how they weight it, and so really take it with a grain of salt. What I would expect is Lisenby is underfunded. She's way underfunded, and that's the reason why she challenged Blake Moore to a series, 5 debates, one in each county in Congressional District 2. That's what candidates who are way behind due. That is the move that they do. They challenge the incumbent to a bunch of debates, dare them to show up for these debates. And really, there's no incentive for an incumbent to do that. These kind of debates are high risk, low reward for an incumbent. He does not want to get on the stage with her where she can, land a punch. He could give an inarticulate answer or stumble over an answer, and there's a gaffe that shows up on social media. Why would he do this at all? There's no incentive for him to do that. But she's doing something. She has to get attention somehow. She has to get media attention somehow. And this is an easy way to do it because she's not going to have the money to buy a big television ad blitz. Moore can just carpet bomb the airwaves if he feels like he needs to. The fact that we haven't seen a lot of Blake Moore ads, at least I haven't seen any. I don't know if you have, but I haven't seen a lot of Blake Moore ads right now. That tells me that he's pretty confident about his position. They will have one debate coming up, the revamped Utah Debate Commission, which is now the Hinckley Institute of Politics. And my thoughts on that, on these debates, but they will have one debate that's already scheduled on June 1st up at the Eccles Broadcast Center. That's going to be a televised debate. And if they stick to what happens in the past, the format's going to be terrible. It's going to be very advantageous to Blake Moore, where they're going to have a set number, a set time to answer questions. I know they had a meeting last week about ground rules for the debate. Everybody will have a certain amount of time to answer a question, and you'll be limited for follow-ups. And it just doesn't do anything to really inform voters. And a good politician, and Blake Moore's been through this a number of times, he'll just, he'll use up his entire amount of time without really saying anything. So there's not going to be a lot of engagement. It's not going to be, it's not really going to be a way for Lisenby to score a lot of points, unless she pulls what Trent Staggs tried to do against John Curtis in their primary debate in 2024 when they were running for Senate. If you remember, Staggs had the final statement. He was the final closing statement, which again, who cares? But the final closing statement, and he used it to launch an attack on Curtis over his alleged profiteering from the stock market, from insider trading, which has sort of dogged him throughout his entire career. That was a calculated attack from Staggs. I'm pretty sure that his advisors told him to do that, hoping that he would get this out there, make that accusation, and Curtis would not have a chance to reply. Curtis, to his credit, jumped in, demanded to answer, and was able to give an answer and rebut it. And I don't think it had the impact that it could have had if Curtis was not allowed to answer. But you can only try that once. Moore is probably going to be very, very on guard for Lisenby to pull something like that. She's got some of her advisors are the same people who advise Staggs in 2024. I'll be curious to see if President Trump issues an endorsement in this race. He's endorsed Blake Moore in the past. I don't know if he'll endorse Moore this time around, or if he'll endorse Lisenby, because a lot of the people on her team, or the people who are advising her, have some pretty good contacts in Trump world. So I don't know which way that one's going to go. Same thing with the Congressional District 3. I don't know if Trump's going to get involved with that. He has endorsed Congresswoman Celeste Malloy in the past. Phil Lyman, when he ran for governor in 2024, he kept pointing to him being pardoned by President Trump as sort of a tacit endorsement. It's not, and I don't think it has the kind of impact that he thinks it does, but I expect him to continue to point at that as well. Let's see. Nathan Detroit says Blake Moore seems to like billboards on I-15 for his ad spends. It depends on what Election Hive tells him to do. That's who's running his campaign. They've been running his campaign for the past few years, and they've been very effective. They haven't lost, and this is the fourth time Moore's been through a primary. He's pretty battle tested. He knows how these things run. Lisenby has only had one primary in her entire career, and that was in 2018. In the last two elections for state legislature, she was unopposed. She has not had a tough campaign. And when you have a battle-tested team versus someone who's had an easy time getting elected, there's an advantage there. Lisenby has not faced opposition since 2018. Moore has faced it every cycle since 2020. Let's see if there are any other comments out there. Not really seeing anything on TikTok that I haven't addressed. On Instagram, again, if you have a comment, a question, anything, we can talk about the data center, please leave it in the chat, and I will get to it as quickly as possible. Kathy says 9 out of 10 out of the 12 nominees are graduates of BYU Law School. They were vetted by a commission. I mean, this is not just the legislature is not just pulling these names out of a hat. They were vetted by a commission. The commission's appointed, obviously, but these are people who know what they're doing. And it's not every judge in the state is in the pool of potential nominees. It's the people who actually apply for these openings. Like they said in the past, like I said, according to Senator Weiler, only 4 women applied for these 2 openings. And I'm not saying that had a factor to do with it, but the pool of potential women nominees was very small to start with. Nathan DeJoy says, hold on, I can apply to be a Utah Supreme Court justice. Sign me up. Do you have a law license? Is your bar license current? I think that's probably one of the things you have to do. Gabriel says, you mentioned race forecasts you are working on. Could you speak to what you're doing there? Yeah, you'll find those at utahpolitics.news. I've created a rating system for every single House race, all 75 of the House races that are up for election this year, and the 14 Senate races. And I have 2 ratings, and I'm pulling those up right here. But I have 2 ratings. The first rating is just the likely outcome. And that's pretty much based on the partisan performance of a district in the past. I analyzed a number of statewide races going back to, I think, the 2012 presidential race. I was able to map those onto the current districts to sort of get an idea of where, sort of get an idea of how those districts perform. And that's where the likely outcome comes from. To explain it, sorry, I heard outside. I was just, like I said, I have a dog who's prone to seizures, and I heard some noise outside. And so I was just trying to, I lost my train of thought because I was trying to listen to see if I needed to go and help out with that. But fortunately, no. But the likely outcome rating, that's just based on the share of the 2-party vote that a Republican or a Democratic candidate usually receives. We were talking earlier about House District 10. Right now, that's lean Democratic according to my races, according to my ratings. It was toss-up when I ran these initially, but then I factored in campaign cash on hand. But it was originally toss-up because in the last 2 election cycles, that race has been basically a 50-50 split. In 2024 and 2022, those were 2 of the closest legislative races that we've seen in quite some time. So that's the likely outcome, just what you expect to happen. But I've also created a thing called the Utah Competitiveness Index. And what that does is it shows how a district compares statewide to the Republican baseline of about 64.5%. That's the baseline. That's the typical average Republican performance in these districts statewide, 64.5%. And so you get a competitiveness index. And so what HD10 is, that is rated as D plus 8.9. That does not mean that a Democrat is going to win by 8.9 points. That means that a Democratic candidate does on average does 8.9 points better than that statewide average of Republicans getting 64.5%. So, that makes it a very competitive race. And we've seen those in the last two elections where Rosemary Lesser won in a very close election in 2022 and then lost in a very close election in 2024. And so that's how those forecasts are calculated. And you'll find those on my website, utahpolitics.news, all 15 Utah Senate races that are on the ballot, all 75 House races. But that is a subscriber only because it was a significant amount of work for me to come up with these and secure the data, put it in a format where we could synthesize it into this. And I'll continue to update these as we get more input. There will be another update coming up after the primaries where some of the races where I haven't really touched we'll probably have a clear winner in a number of those. So, but you can go to my website, utahpolitics.news. If you become an annual subscriber, you can get access to all of these ratings. There's an interactive map that you can dig into. There's a chart and some other charts and some other graphics as well. Okay. So there's that. Let's see. Catherine Beeley on Facebook says maybe the reason more women didn't apply is because the women on the court particularly have been targeted. I think that's a good point. I can't say you're wrong when you're at the Utah Republican State Convention and several times from the podium, you have speakers, the party chairman saying that they want to, they're urging people to vote against these two female judges who are up for a retention election. Maybe that does play a part. It certainly has got to be in the back of the mind of a lot of these people. Catherine also says, we're also assuming that not one of the four who applied was qualified. Maybe anti-DEI played a factor. Don't you know that DEI is gone? I mean, we've ended DEI. Everything is now based 100% on merit. Can't tell I'm being sarcastic. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe it is anti-DEI played a factor. But remember, DEI is now illegal here in Utah because we can't be doing that anymore because it upsets John Johnson and a few other people. SJ says, I call them DUI hires now. Maybe not here in Utah, but I agree with that. SJ on TikTok. He's a good follow on TikTok. If you're on TikTok, he goes by ESSJAY. He's a good follow. He's got some good insights. I appreciate his perspective. Thanks for joining the live. Good to have you on board tonight. Proud Nani says my race ratings were mentioned at the Democratic State Convention. Really? Who mentioned them? Because that makes me happy. I don't know if it makes anybody. I don't know if they were mentioned in a positive light, but I'm glad that they were getting some attention because I worked pretty darn hard on those things. Like I worked really hard on that, and I think there's a lot of useful information there. And like I said, I'm working on some scenarios, trying to see what would happen if we get a Democratic wave, and based on the size of the wave, how it might impact down ballot races here in Utah, how it might impact state legislative races here in Utah. And there is a point where things start to get interesting, at least what I'm seeing right now, as I consider the size of the Democratic wave. But I think it would have to be a pretty significant Democratic wave to make a big impact. But that'll be coming sometime this week. Proud Nani says several of the candidates did, and they were mentioned in the Friday afternoon training classes. Well, good. Hope some people subscribe because I think that there's some really good information there. Okay. Speaking of legislative races, one of the things that I'm really interested in that I've been noticing, and this is one of the things that I do because I'm not well. I do follow a lot of right-wing podcasts who are based here in Utah, just to see what they're talking about. Most of them are terrible, like really terrible. But one of the things I have noticed is that Representative Trevor Lee is doing a lot of damage control when it comes to Senate Bill 153, which is the bill that is going to make your voter registration information public. And he's spending a lot of time going on these podcasts and these live streams for the live streams for these right-wing groups, spending a lot of time explaining why we needed this bill. One of the things he points to is that Judicial Watch, that right-wing group out of Washington, D.C., has threatened to sue the state. Well, they threatened, but they never did it. They threatened to sue the state, but they never did. It was actually another group, the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which is tied to Cleta Mitchell somehow. And Cleta Mitchell is one of the Trump lawyers. She was on the Georgia phone call with Brad Raffensperger, where Trump was asking for them to find him 11,000 votes after the 2020 election so he could win Georgia. Cleta Mitchell was on that phone call. She's deep in the election denial community. I think she was one of the founders of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. Anyway, they helped Phil Lyman in his lawsuit. So Judicial Watch never sued the state. It was Phil Lyman and PILF who did it. But he points to how Judicial Watch was threatening to sue the state, which has never stopped lawmakers from doing something before. Threats of being sued, have not stopped them before when it's something they really want to do, but they claim they were going to be sued by Judicial Watch. But he's spending a lot of time going on these podcasts and doing damage control. That tells me that he's running into a lot of resistance on the campaign trail to people who are upset about these things. He's got a primary coming up against Bob Stevenson, Davis County Commissioner, and he's attacking Stevenson for his work on the Davis County Commission that led to increased property taxes. There was a story last week, and that was put out by KSL that I thought it was a really confusing piece of journalism, and I'm not one to defend Representative Lee, but I think he's got a point in his criticism of this story. I actually was so the story came out that he built a brand new house in the district, and some of the subcontractors were not getting paid for their work on the house, and they sued the contractor, the main contractor that Representative Lee was working with to build the house, and they ended up adding Representative Lee and his wife to the lawsuit. I was aware of this suit a couple of weeks ago. I came across it when I was browsing through court records, just to see if there's anything was going on, and I came across this lawsuit. But if you read it, he was dismissed from the lawsuit. He got a certificate of compliance. He met all of his obligations. Basically, he paid the contractor, and the contractor, from what I gather in this lawsuit, was not paying the subcontractors. And that happens. But KSL, the way that they framed the story, made it sound like Trevor Lee was stiffing subcontractors, and that's not what happened. And he was actually dismissed from this case. But it was a really confusing piece of journalism, because if you looked at the court records, Representative Lee didn't do anything wrong here. He was not acting in a shady manner when it came to these subcontractors not being paid. From what I gather, it was the contractor not paying the subcontractors. And that's where the lawsuit came from. And he was actually dismissed from the lawsuit. He was made a part of the lawsuit. And then the court was like, oh yeah, you've done what you need to do here. You've satisfied your obligations. This is a dispute between the subcontractors and the contractor. But KSL really didn't. It was very confusing the way that they framed this story. Again, I'm not in the business of defending Trevor Lee, but the way that story, there's a reason that I passed on it. I was aware of it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, oh, there might be a story here. And then when you read through the documents, I was like, oh, there's not a story here. So that's the reason why I passed on this. I had it a couple of weeks ago, but it was not a story that I thought the juice wasn't worth the squeeze on that one, because as I said, it was a confusing piece of journalism. And I'll just leave it at that. A couple of things about Trevor Lee in the chat here. Kathy says none of that matters. Republican leadership doesn't like him anymore. He's a liability. Yeah, he didn't really get any bills passed this year. He does point to the bills that he co-sponsored. He was the floor sponsor, but that doesn't mean anything. None of the pieces of legislation that he officially sponsored passed. And again, I don't know if it's because he was being punished by leadership who got tired of answering for the way that he behaves online, or if they were trying to protect him from himself. But he didn't. He didn't pass any bills. Proud Nani says his neighbors seemed to like him. I spoke to a few of them at the Davis Pride on Saturday. They hated his politics, but said he was a nice neighbor. That's probably when he. I don't know where I was going with that. That's going to be interesting. A lot of people seem to think that Representative Lee is in trouble when it comes to this primary. And remember, he was in a primary in 2024 and only won it by about 500 votes over Daniela Harding. And Daniela Harding does not have the name ID that Bob Stevenson does. Bob Stevenson is extremely well known in the community. And it was kind of funny to watch Representative Lee try to spin his loss at convention. He did send out a press release where he said, he got a significant number of delegates at convention. He got 45% of the delegates. He did not get a majority. He lost the delegate vote. But back to the issue of him doing damage control. He appeared on a podcast, and it's called the God and Country podcast with Uriah and Ingrid. And this podcast is so ridiculous. First of all, the main host is a guy by the name of Uriah Kennedy. And if you don't know who Uriah Kennedy is, he has got a long list of civil actions against him. Back in 2012, I believe he pled guilty to in a scheme where he and another person, they were trying to get a loan from a bank in Arkansas to refurbish or do a redevelopment project. I think it was in downtown, maybe it was in Ogden, but they were trying to get they got an $18 million loan for this redevelopment project. They used the money for other construction projects and for personal expenses, and they submitted false paperwork to the bank. He pled guilty to that. He got sentenced to a year and a day in federal prison for that, and he had to pay like $7 million in restitution. There's another case during COVID where his company at the time went to a healthcare company in Minnesota and sold them, and I'll put sold in quotes, but sold them 15 million pairs of gloves. And this is when everyone was scrambling to try to get PPE during the COVID pandemic. And he had like 15 million gloves that he was going to sell to this company for the sum of $1 million. Once he got the money, the story changed, and he never ended up delivering on those gloves. And they sued him, and they won a judgment of like $1.2 million. So that's who this Uriah Kennedy is on this podcast. He was at the Davis County Convention, and he was walking around with this gigantic, and I mean it was gigantic, it looked like this, it was like this big, homemade press pass around his neck, because he hosts this podcast, this God and Country podcast that gets all the right wingers from the legislature on. And I saw this press pass, and it was just so clownishly bad. He walks around with a big cowboy hat on. He had this press pass on. At the same time, he's sitting there trying to get elected as a delegate, an alternate delegate to the state convention, while he's pretending to be a member of the media. That's, given his past, ethically sketchy, but it was so cartoonish, it was laughable. I mean, just a clown show. And then he bought a booth at the state convention. But I did hear reports that in the House districts, in the caucus meeting, in one of the precincts, or in Trevor Lee's House district, he showed up and was demanding to be elected a delegate, but he didn't even live in that district. But yet he was demanding to be elected a delegate. But when they drop an episode, I listen to it to see if anybody says anything, because I don't think you should have to listen to that drivel. But it was just so clownishly bad. Kathy says political as heck is bad enough. It's not as bad as Politicket with John Johnson, and then they've got the Politicket Southern Utah, which is just as bad. So bad. Anyway, I'm thinking of starting to do a series, politicians on podcasts, and just sort of breaking down what happens with those politicians. I probably should have mentioned that out loud, but I'm probably going to start doing that, because I think you deserve to hear what some of the things that these guys say on these podcasts. And there are quite a few of them out there, and nobody listens to them. Let's see. Proud Nani says, even if Lee gets past his primary, Abigail Treasure is beginning to really build a following in her House district. She's got a big, she's got a big hill to climb based on the past partisan breakdown, but according to the Utah Competitiveness Index, that is a district that has the potential to be competitive. It is, I have it rated under the competitive, under the likely outcome. I have it under safe R, safe Republican, because that's what you would expect to happen in that district. But under the Utah Competitiveness Index, it's really only R plus 2.9. So it's only a little bit above the statewide average of 64.5%. So that HD16 is a district that could be competitive if everything falls the right way. Let's see. Anybody else have any comments out there? Let's see. If You Say So on TikTok says, how do you think the data center will affect MAGA? They seem upset. I don't know what this is going to, what impact this is going to have on the election. I think it's going to have some ripples in the Senate District 7 race with Stuart Adams in his first ever primary, but I don't know how much I don't know how much of a ripple that's going to be. And he's got two other candidates there who could split the anti-Adams vote, and whoever wins might win with a plurality. It is significant that Adams has never had a primary in his career. And now he's got a three-way primary. He had to get signatures, and it kind of tells that he hasn't really had to campaign hard in the past. I saw him at the Davis County convention, the Republican convention there, and all the candidates were given like 3 minutes to address the delegates. He only took 2, and it was the same speech I've heard over and over again, where he just talks about how we're the highest rated state for business and number 1 in these ratings and blah, 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 and so on and so forth, and that's it. There really wasn't a lot of talk about a reason to vote for him, other than the fact that, Utah is doing well economically, and he's pointing to his leadership as a reason for that. But he only took 2 minutes out of the 3, which I thought was weird, because they usually have to drag politicians off the stage when they address convention delegates. Let's see. Any other comments out there? Representative Matt McPherson seems to be going down the conspiracy theory path. Well, if you know how he was first elected, he won in a special election. I think it was like 30 or 35 people. I can look that up real quick. Hold on. Tyler Cotter. I think it was Tyler Cotter. It was Quinn Cotter. It was Representative Quinn Cotter just all of a sudden quit after his first year in the legislature, and he just stepped down. And there was a special election to pick his replacement, and I was there. I showed up for that special election. There's not a lot of that's one thing, you don't see a lot of reporters showing up for those special elections. Sorry, I'm trying to find this exact in my notes about what happened, because something remarkable happened at that election. I'm doing some producing in person because I wasn't expecting to talk about Quinn Cotter tonight. But let's go ahead and talk about Quinn Cotter. So Cotter was elected. He resigned from his seat in House District 26 after serving one session in the legislature. This time in the legislature was notable because he was the only person to vote against the budget on the final day of the session when it came up for a vote. But he was first elected in 2022. He beat Democrat Elizabeth Waite by 127 votes. After he stepped down, the Republican delegates in that district picked Matt McPherson to replace him. But what happened, and I'm so glad I was there, and I started running a recorder the moment this happened, but his sister gets up. Quinn Cotter didn't even show up for this thing, but his sister did, and she had a letter from him in which he tore into his Republican colleagues. And again, it was remarkable. I was the only reporter there. Nobody else bothered to show up. It was literally like a Wednesday night in October over in West Valley at an elementary school, and I was the only reporter who showed up. But he penned this letter that his sister then read out and just hammered his Republican colleagues in the legislature. He talked about trolls and demons in this. Part of this, and I'm reading from my notes here, he said, "I want you to know that all of the vitriol that was thrown at my heart, the worst came from Republican Party leaders right here in House District 26. Those are the communications that cut me the deepest, although heavily criticized for having quoted the Bible. I make absolutely no apology to anyone for having do so." He was talking about his vote on the bill to pause transgender health care for youth, or gender affirming treatments for transgender youth here in Utah. And he voted no against the bill. But he said that he should have voted yes, but this letter was remarkable. But it was, I can't remember exactly how many delegates. It was probably like 30 or 40 delegates who showed up for that. And McPherson, who had run for legislature before, only got about 30 votes, and then he is in the legislature. He's been there ever since. If you look at the number of lawmakers who have been elected in these special elections, that has shaped so much of the way the legislature is made up. And most of the people who are ideologues up there right now, they come in the special election because they only have to appeal to a small number of delegates rather than winning the seat in a contested election, and then they are the incumbents. That just happened this last week. Rob Bishop, the former congressman, is returning to the Utah House, and he will be the incumbent on the ballot in November. He won the Republican nomination, but he also won the special election to fill the vacancy in that seat, and so now he is the incumbent member of the legislature. But there's so many of the members of the legislature, particularly the ideologues, who win these seats by just appealing to a handful of delegates who represent, maybe half of 1% of all the Republican voters in the district, and even less of that of all the voters in the district. But the power of incumbency is so strong because most people don't know who their lawmaker is. They just look at the party on the ballot. I don't know what that's going to do in this election. SJ on TikTok asks, do you think Lisenby has a chance? Everybody has a chance. I think she's a decided underdog. I don't know how popular she's going to be. I don't know how popular her attacks on Blake Moore are for his work with Better Boundaries in 2018 to get the to get Prop 4 on the ballot in 2018. I don't know how effective that is. I'll be watching that very closely with the primary, because if she does come close or even beat him, then I think a lot of people, I think Republicans are going to be in really good shape, because they will have tapped into that anger over the new congressional maps. I don't know how much of it exists right now, but I think that her race is going to be a bellwether as to how Republican voters feel about this whole thing. Lady of the Great Salt Lake says, how do we think SD11 will fare with the appointed seat to the Forward Party now in election? Well, in my ratings, I mean, it's a Republican seat. Although there was quite a shocking thing that happened at the convention. Former House Majority Whip John Notwell, he has been targeting that seat for years, just waiting for former Senator Daniel Thatcher to step down. Thatcher did not do that until after he had switched to the Forward Party. But Notwell, who was as I said, the House Majority Whip, member of leadership in the House, he stepped down from that position when he got a big job with a tech company, or his work responsibilities wouldn't allow him to continue. And Candace Paparucci won the special election to replace him in that seat. He has been targeting Senate District 11, that seat held by Daniel Thatcher, for years. He had close to $100,000 in his campaign account, but he did not get signatures. He was backed by legislative leadership. I know that Senate President Stuart Adams was backing him. I know that Mike Schultz was backing him. He had a lot of backing from a lot of powerful Republicans, and he got smoked in the convention vote. Brooks Benson, who's from the Tooele area, from what I understand, beat him handily, like shocked him in that race. And so I don't know how much financial backing Benson is going to have, but he's got to have the advantage right now. There's not a lot of Forward Party members. I don't know how bipartisan that district is. It is a Republican district. It is a Republican seat. And if things go according, and if you just go chalkboard, Republicans probably should win that seat. It was an area that used to be Democratic until Daniel Thatcher beat Brent Goodfellow. I mean, the lines have changed, but Thatcher just outworked Brent Goodfellow the first time he got elected, shocked him in that race, and defeated him to win that seat in the Senate so many years ago. But the only reason the Forward Party has a seat is because Thatcher switched his party and then stepped down. So I don't know. It's going to be really tough for her to hang on that seat. At least that's my read on this. Katie Did It says Michael Finch is the Democrat running against McPherson. He's a great candidate. I thought that McPherson was going to have a much tougher race in 2024 when he was running against Janetta Williams, who is the Salt Lake leader of the NAACP. And he won that fairly easily. It wasn't as close as I expected. So I don't know how that's going to work out. We'll just have to see how this campaign goes along. Jaden Week says, Stuart Adams received a few hundred postcards from his constituents over the weekend. The Indivisible group leader delivered them personally. He tried not to take them due to, quote, safety concerns, but the Indivisible group leader down there scanned each one individually to make sure he would get them. Direct action. That's how a democracy is supposed to work. They are your representatives. And, I applaud them getting their message to President Adams. Kathy on YouTube says, medical freedom nutcases like Representative Grecius doesn't think people should be forced to be vaccinated against measles, although she admits to be vaccinated herself and her family. That's part of this whole weird MAHA movement, and Grecius is not the worst offender there. That is, again, just lost my train of thought there. That is Kristen Chevrier, an HD 54. She's the worst offender. Before she got involved in politics, she ran a group called Vaccine Free Utah. She was very involved in the fight over vaccinations during COVID, was part of the endless committee hearings where they let people just yell about vaccinations and whatnot. But yeah, Chevrier is much more in the Maha group than much more the leader of that group. And if you look at it, I mean, Speaker Mike Schultz has given his tacit endorsement. I mean, he's accompanied her to Washington for events with Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy. But when you're talking about anti-vax activists, Chevrier has to be at the top of the list. And she won her nomination fairly easily, and she's going for a second term. Gabriel says, when Representative Snyder gets up on a raw milk bill and effectively says, maybe we're going too far with this one, colleagues, it's gotten bad. There's not a lot of, surprisingly, the restraint or the cooling mechanism for a lot of this stuff is the Senate. They have really put a lot of brakes on legislation that is questionable. They put a lot of brakes. They've stopped a lot of legislation from going forward. And they've done that in the past couple of sessions. That really has upset a lot of the ideologues in the House. In one of those podcasts that I was listening to with Representative Trevor Lee, he was basically saying that the Senate is a bunch of old people who fall asleep and don't understand what the young people want. But they're the reason why a lot of his legislation has not moved forward, because the Senate has basically said, we're not going to pick that up. He did have that one bill that he substituted most of his HB 88, which is the anti-immigrant bill, the one that would block them from accessing government services. He substituted that in on the House floor. It did pass the House, but it didn't go anywhere because nobody in the Senate wanted to be the sponsor. They couldn't find a Senate sponsor, and that's how it died. And that has really caused a lot of anger among members of the House. Okay, well, I've been talking for about an hour and a half, and I need to go and attend to my wife, who is recovering from surgery, and go check on my dog and make sure that she's okay. A lot of MASH unit happening here at the Schott household over the past couple of days, but I am glad to spend this time with you. I'm so glad for your attention. I'm so glad for your questions. I'm glad that we can chat about Utah politics. I want to make sure that I got everything I wanted to talk about. One last thing I do want to talk about. And this is just something to watch going forward, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to have another redistricting saga next year. This House is probably going to try to redraw the districts again for 2028. And so I don't think that the maps that we have in place right now are going to be the maps that we have until the next time redistricting rolls around in 2031, when we're expected to get a fifth seat in Congress. And the reason I say that is because this map is a remedial map, and it was only put in place because if the judge didn't put it in place, because the legislature and their legal team screwed up so badly on the timeline that we weren't going to have a map at all. And the judge had a responsibility to put a map in place, and that's why this map is here. I do not expect that this map will be the map that we see in 2028 for the 2028 election. I would be surprised. Now, if the legislature does redraw the maps, and since we're not repealing Prop 4, and if their constitutional amendment that they're threatening to put on there that would allow them to repeal Prop 4, if those don't pass and they have to play by the rules of Prop 4, then the map that we're going to get is going to be a lot different from the 2021 map. It'll probably be closer to the option C map that they tried to pass this last time, but they got in trouble because they used partisan data, which you're not allowed to do. But again, I don't think there's any way for the legislature to draw a map that does not have a seat that is at least considered competitive. but I don't expect that we'll see the map that we have right now. I think Salt Lake County will have this big district centered on Salt Lake County for this election cycle. And then if I were a betting man or I had an account on Kalshi, I would say that I would bet the house that we would not have that map. Gabriel says, does that mean that they'll impanel a new redistricting committee? They would have to, or they would have to just use the redistricting committee they did this last time, which was chaired by Scott Sandel and Representative Perucci. So it'd probably be just the same committee. I don't think they would have to do anything different, although it would be a different legislature and people might get, different people would get appointed to it. So anyway, that's just something that's been on my mind, something I've been thinking about. Anyway, that's going to do it for me this evening. Again, I appreciate your time, your attention, your questions, your support. Utah Political Watch, my publication. I'm an independent journalist, and the only person who's responsible for everything you see on the website is me. I do everything. My wife helps a little bit, but I do about 99% of everything on the site. And I like that because I'm not funded by billionaires. I'm not funded by corporate interests. They're not telling me what I can and cannot cover. We don't have a Barry Weiss and CBS News situation here. It's just me, and I'm accountable to my listeners. I'm accountable to you. I'm accountable to my viewers. And if you appreciate that, if you want to support that, if you want to support independent journalism, then I would encourage you, I would ask you to go to my website, utahpolitics.news, and you can become a subscriber. You can sign up for my newsletter for free. That'll get you most of my journalism in your inbox for free. There is some stuff I put behind the paywall for paying members. If you want to become a subscriber, it's like $5 a month, $55 a year. That's like 17 cents a day. And it helps keep what I'm doing here going. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I appreciate being accountable to my readers, to the people who consume my product, and that's the way that I think that media is going. And media is so important, especially in this moment. I was so happy to see that the staff of the Minneapolis Star Tribune, now obviously they're corporate owned, but the staff of the Minneapolis Star Tribune was given a national Pulitzer yesterday for their coverage of the chaos that was wrought by ICE and the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. That was so deserving, and it made my heart leap because those guys worked their ass off, and they did such a great job telling that story. And that's why journalism is so important, because people are telling these stories. People are looking into things. People are holding public officials accountable. And that's my job. And I can only do it with your help. And this thing that I'm building, the thing that we're building, I'll put it that way, it wants to be, it wants to live. It certainly is growing. It's never growing as fast as you want. But I can say, and this is a source of pride, I didn't lose money on it last year. I didn't make a lot of money on it, but I didn't lose money on it, which not a lot of people can say that. And that's because of you all. That's because of you who subscribe, support the product, share my stories online, get it out to a wider audience. So, it wants to live, and that's because of you guys. But we can always use more of you. We can always use more of you to help keep this thing going. So I would encourage you, go to my website, utahpolitics.news. Pretty easy URL. Sign up for my newsletter. Subscribe if you want to. Throw some money in the tip jar if you want to. Every little bit helps. And it just allows me to do what I'm doing. So anyway, this will be available as a podcast tomorrow. I'm going to edit it, just do some slight editing, and then I'll put it out as a podcast tomorrow. If you missed any portion of it, you can go back and listen to it. But again, thank you so much for your time, and a lot of stuff coming up. And we'll do this again soon, probably at the latest next week, maybe again this week if things warrant. but I'm working on a number of things for the future. SJ's asked, do I go live daily or randomly or weekly set time? Right now, I'm usually going live on Tuesday evenings, right around 7 o'clock. That's the time that seems to work best right now. But I'm open to I'm open to suggestions, and you can see all of my social handles on the screen. My email is right there. Send me an email if a time works better for you. But this will be available as a podcast tomorrow, so you can listen to it. If you have a question that you want me to answer on a future episode, drop it in the email. Send me a DM. I see your DMs all the time. If you have a news tip, send it to me in an email or in a DM. You'll find my Signal online. There's a lot of places where you can reach me. And I love hearing from you. I love hearing from all of you. But that's going to do it for this evening. Thanks again for your time and your attention. I hope everybody has a great evening, and we will talk to you again real soon.